What if white adult girls were virgins before their marriage back in the early and mid-19th century? Well, even though chastity was considered important by society, for the young men marrying virgin girls, it came with confusion. On the wedding night, when their newly wedded wife told them that they were virgins, the husbands would feel surprised. That's because for them, being a virgin meant no boy went closer to them. In other words, the virgins had something wrong. However, to avoid such a situation, white adult girls had thought of a solution. Just one night before their marriage, they would secretly go to the slave huts and choose a black male slave they saw while growing up. This was done so the black male slave could prepare her for her marriage, which was due in only one day. Ultimately, this helped the white girls, giving the impression that they were attractive before marriage and were approached by various young men. However, what did the white virgin girls ask the black male slaves to do with them? In this video, let's find out.
The Black History Archives.
In the early 19th century, a woman's value, particularly in affluent or upper-middle-class families, was inseparably tied to her chastity. Virginity was viewed as the ultimate symbol of purity and morality. Society judged a young woman's worth not by her intellect, achievements, or character, but by her ability to keep herself pure until marriage. Maintaining this image was crucial for her family's honor, social standing, and future prospects. In some cases, girls were made to wear metal undergarments so they could not engage in forbidden acts. The concept of virginity as moral capital was deeply rooted in patriarchal structures. For a family, having a daughter who was known to be chaste was vital in securing advantageous marriages, often arranged by the parents. In such unions, the girl had little agency over her choice of partner. Marriage was not a romantic pursuit, but a strategic alliance between families of equal or desirable status, which would ensure social and economic security. This expectation placed an immense burden on young girls. From a very young age, they were taught that their bodies were to be guarded and preserved, not for their own sake, but for their future husbands. Girls were often raised in ignorance of their own sexuality, taught to see their bodies as objects to be controlled, their desires as sinful, and their virginity as a prize to be handed over on their wedding night. But what happened when the ideals of a society clashed with the personal expectations of a future husband? Well, as the young bride-to-be neared her wedding, she became aware of a disturbing rumor. Her fiancé, a wealthy young man from a prominent family, harbored skepticism about virginity. This was the case with most young men who weighed girls depending on their attractiveness and popularity among men. The husband-to-be's doubt was not rooted in the suspicion that she had lost her purity, but in the bizarre belief that if she was still a virgin, it might mean something was wrong with her. In his mind, the fact that no other man had shown interest in her, or worse, that she had never engaged in sexual acts, might indicate a flaw. This sentiment wasn't common, but it reflected a growing tension within some segments of 19th century male society. In certain circles, men began to believe that women who maintained their virginity into adulthood were either undesirable or lacked appeal. They viewed virginity not as a symbol of purity, but as a sign that the woman had never been sought after by other men, thus indicating that she might be sexually uninteresting. Here's a reminder to please support us so we can make more videos for you by subscribing to our channel and giving the video a like. We want to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. The bride's dilemma is gut-wrenching. On the one hand, she has spent her entire life under societal pressure to guard her chastity. Her family and community would expect nothing less than a virgin bride, and failure to meet that standard would result in shame and dishonor. On the other hand, her husband-to-be's unspoken desire for her to not be a virgin leaves her uncertain. She knows that her virginity, which society values so highly, might be a source of dissatisfaction or even disappointment in her marriage. Caught between these two conflicting expectations, the young woman finds herself desperate. She needs to find a way to lose her virginity before the wedding, but how? The answer, disturbing as it may seem, lies in the plantation. The family she comes from, like many wealthy households of the time, owns black slaves. These men, forced into labor and subjugation, live on the family's plantation. While the young woman has grown up with these slaves in her household, they have always been viewed as property, not people. As the bride grapples with her impossible dilemma, an idea begins to form in her mind. Late one night, just days before her wedding, she sneaks out of the main house and makes her way down to the slave quarters. Her intent is clear. She will find one of the male slaves and force him to engage in sexual activity with her. This, she believes, will solve her problem. By losing her virginity to a black man, she will fulfill the unsaid expectations of her fiancé, while maintaining her outward appearance of purity in the eyes of her family and society. It's important to emphasize that this act was not one of consensual exploration, but an exploitative use of power. The slave, aware of the dangers of disobeying the master's daughter, had no real choice in the matter. His compliance was not driven by desire or mutual attraction, but by fear of retribution, perhaps even death, if he refused her demands. At first, the encounter was purely functional for the young woman. She viewed it as a necessity, a means to an end. She would order the slave to be gentle with her, likely because she was nervous and uncertain of what to expect. Having never engaged in any sexual activity before, she was cautious and timid, unsure of how her body would respond. However, as the encounter progressed, something within her would shift. The rigid constraints that had been placed on her throughout her life, the demands of society to remain chaste, to repress her desires, to act reserved and proper, would begin to crack. In the privacy of this encounter, she would find herself liberated in a way she had never experienced before. The slave, who had been conditioned to obey the demands of his masters, would be careful and gentle at first. But as the young woman's desires intensified, so did the nature of the encounter. No longer content with a simple act of intercourse to rid herself of her virginity, the young woman would begin to explore the full range of her sexual desires. The sexual tension, which had been building within her for years, would be unleashed in this one explosive moment. She would ask the slave to engage in acts that would be considered taboo or forbidden by the society in which she lived. Acts that, under normal circumstances, she would never dare speak of, let alone attempt. In the darkness of the plantation quarters, far from the watchful eyes of her family and society, the young woman crossed boundaries she never thought she could. She would become an active participant in the encounter, not just a passive recipient of sexual experience. Her curiosity, fueled by years of repression, would drive her to explore aspects of her sexuality that are both thrilling and terrifying. But while the experience might have felt liberating for her, it was a stark reminder of the power imbalance at play. The slave, though physically involved, remained powerless. His role was not that of a willing partner, but of a body to be used, a tool to serve the young woman's desires. The fact that she could so easily cross these boundaries speaks to the deep ingrained power structures of the time, where white women, though oppressed in their own way, still held immense power over the bodies and lives of black men. The morning after the encounter, the young woman would return to the main house, preparing herself for the upcoming wedding. On the surface, everything would be normal. She had achieved her goal. She was no longer a virgin, and she could now enter her marriage without fear of disappointing her husband. But beneath the surface, a storm of conflicting emotions brewed. On one hand, she felt a sense of relief. The anxiety surrounding her virginity had been lifted, and she believed she had secured her place as a desirable bride. On the other hand, she could not escape the feeling of guilt and shame. What she had done was not just morally questionable, it was exploitative. She had used a black man, a slave, as a means to an end, without any regard for his humanity or agency. But the shame was not solely tied to her treatment of the slave. It was also tied to the act itself. While the experience had allowed her to explore parts of her sexuality that had been repressed for so long, she now feared that this very exploration would haunt her. She knew that what she had done was forbidden, not just because of the racial dynamics, but because of the nature of the sexual acts she had engaged in. These acts, while liberating at the moment, now felt like a stain on her character, something she must hide from her future husband, her family, and society at large. As for the black male slaves, the encounter was not one of liberation or exploration, but one of degradation and exploitation. As a black man living in a society that viewed him as property, he had no agency over his own body. He was forced into a sexual act not because he desired it, but because he had no choice. What do you think? Does this continue to this day, and whether white girls use black men to prepare for their marriage? Isn't it true that this is a dark part of black history everyone should be told about? In the comments section right below, share your thoughts about in what other ways black male slaves were sexually used. Would you like us to make more videos? If yes, please support us by subscribing to the Black History Archives and clicking the bell icon. You can check out more videos on our channel too.